do some things that are kind of up in the air, you know, not.
They want to be there to do a second one first.
Awesome.
I mean, we did do that, right?
Council, you were there. Did you? Scarlett, she is six now. So I had. No, the first one, yeah, she's super sweet, super like, well, the second one is the because she's like 300. Yeah, well, I couldn't imagine.
Pretty regular.
How does he have? How's your job going?
I have a friend, colleague who's
And they're having their
plans all over this country.
Eric, who's the editor of the
Best practices are, I mean, he's working all of that.
Good, I'm glad I don't smell like
I always had this idea that you say all the local development,
Is it a good one? Even though I like have this.
I hope you like the part about the lions and tigers and bears.
Did you give it a title on
Yeah, it's an event.
it?
It's an event.
Perfect, and the agenda and things like that.
So they would raise big animals around, blah, blah, blah.
I'm still waiting for, so I'm curious, I'll go check it out. But the house, and the building on the corner of, Unit 25th and Decatur. And it somehow managed to survive all the dogs.
Oh, should I get them to do the lights?
Oh, yeah. Okay, I'll go talk.
That was a hard to do, so lots of circus.
So I'm actually a consultant.
You gotta run out there and pull the zipper on the light.
I don't get to run out.
Also, we can see the screen.
Yeah.
So I got. Saying they've had a lot of change and even in the department with staff and stuff.
Across the street. Remember when
Yeah.
the stories
Yeah.
Welcome everybody to our 23rd meeting, which I guess means next month will be 2 years of these meetings working on this project. So yeah, thank you all for your commitment to this project. So here we are on the timeline, and as you know, right now we're having the community review the draft plan, and we're reviewing it with you guys as well. So the ground rules, I mean, I think many of you have heard them, so I'll go over them. I think the biggest thing is just making space for everyone to speak. So if you're someone who tends to talk more, to hold back, to give space to others, and if you're someone who tends to talk less, challenge yourself to speak up. And then I think everybody's steering committee members or planning team. So probably the last point about the public is not relevant today. Okay. So here's our kind of plan for the evening. So we're gonna get an update on the engagement for the draft plan. Then we're gonna kind of touch on those issues. During the last meeting, we kind of talked a lot about missing middle, and there was things brought up about whether or not it will be really affordable, the effect on character, but also balancing that with the community kind of expressing more their desire for more missing middle. And then we're gonna have a discussion around that. So they're gonna kind of overview what's currently in the plan around those issues, and then we're gonna kind of have a discussion on, is that adequate? What, if anything, we need to do more in the plan? And we'll take a break. That could go, you know, this first conversation could be long, but, and then we'll hopefully come back and we'll talk about the Sunnyside, area. Because we've had some feedback from business owners there about potential changes to the plan. And then we'll close with our next steps as per usual. And so, yes, someone's gonna start us off with a kind of.
Real quick though, they were waiting.
Print a copy of the plan? Yes, I think so, right? I don't know if we have any.
Oh, print copy. You can take this one after the meeting.
Yeah, of course,
this one.
understandable.
Take her, take that one. Cool. Great. So I'll go ahead and provide a quick update on the engagement just for a couple of slides. And then I'll turn it over to Janie here. So this is the same slide from last month, but updated here. So since this is, I think, pulled from Wednesday of last week, so we, so far, kind of since the kickoff of the event for Phase 4, our large open house at North High, we attended about 11 meetings and pop-ups so far, and through those we've been able to have about a little over 200 kind of interactions, just directly talking with residents, going through the key concepts and opportunities for their neighborhood, just to have that kind of more one-on-one conversation about the recommendations and how residents are feeling about them. So, and also just to create more awareness and point people to the online survey and the document that's available there. So, in terms of draft plans we use, so people that have visited the document itself online, it's sitting a little bit over 5,000, so kind of additional 1,000 views compared to last month we checked on the numbers. And then for people that have kind of interacted with the draft plan or filled out survey, we're looking towards right now a little over 250 individuals that did so. And then for the conveyed document itself, I think last month we had about 100 comments or so, and then when we pulled it last week, we received an additional 100 comments, so about 200 so far. And we also just took a peek at some of the demographics about who we're engaging with. So as a reminder for this initial phase, we're also working with the promotoras to do a similar engagement work we did in Phase 2, where they did a lot of the intercept surveys of just being on the ground, being where the community members are. So the demographic is pretty comparable to when we did the Phase 2 engagement. We're definitely hearing more from Hispanic Latino populations, renters in the area, and people of lower income. So the bar chart on the right is just kind of a quick snapshot of the ethnicity that's been captured. Not everyone filled out a demographic survey, but for those that did, that's kind of what we're looking at. So as a reminder, typically after we compile all this data together, we share it back to the community, so you'll see the details a little bit more once we get the information cleaned up a bit. So, like Grace said in the agenda, we're going to be covering kind of two main topics of discussion. The first, I'll turn it over to Janie, is for missing middle housing. So, revisiting and kind of building on the conversations we had last month.
All right, thanks. Okay, so our first topic is missing middle housing that we're going to revisit with the steering committee. If you'll recall, those of you who were here last month, we talked specifically about this, and this was a theme that we heard so far in the draft plan from the community, was wanting the plan to actually talk more about expanding missing middle opportunities. And the feedback that we got from you all was you know, that's great, but let's be careful about how we might look at expanding missing middle opportunities and be aware of unintended consequences. And so we really focused last steering committee talking about focusing on not losing affordability and character and being aware of that. We talked about, you know, missing middle is one concept, but missing middle income is really what we want to achieve. And so we want to frame, we understand the plan is lengthy. There are a lot of recommendations. So first of all, tonight we want to kind of break this down, and we also want to try better in the update to the plan to make it to stream together the concept of housing, because some of the recommendations are in economy and housing, and some are in land use. Land use talks more about the physical form of housing, zoning, and things, you know, how to allow more housing. And then the housing chapter talks really specifically about the affordability. So we came up with this concept to streamline that in the plan. And so first of all, we want to talk about stabilizing. So first and foremost, we want to stabilize existing residents. And we have a number of recommendations specifically to direct you to the plan. H1, H2, and H3 recommendations talk a lot about that stabilization policy. And we have a lot of recommendations. These are for renters and owners, stabilizing existing residents, and it's everywhere. So that we're going to break down this map that we have, the missing middle map. And so all the yellow outlined here in the center of the plan, those are what's designated as low residential. Everywhere else kind of already allows missing middle to happen, and we'll talk about that later. But we're really talking about, you know, our embedded neighborhoods, which is the majority of the plan. And so we have recommendations in the housing and economy, H1 through H3, about supporting wealth building and home ownership opportunities. Establishing a community land trust, for example, where a land trust could buy properties, own the land, and control the price of homes. Limiting, I think this is the first time in a neighborhood plan we put this in here, but working on a policy that the city could come up with that would limit corporate investment speculation. And so we have a policy around that. Promoting small-scale housing co-ops. So this, you know, idea that's it's gaining popularity, but it's still kind of a counterculture kind of thing. But you know, as housing prices increase, why can't, you know, my friends and I pull together our resources and buy a house together and do a co-op? Supporting construction of ADUs everywhere. So this is, you know, along with the wealth building and home ownership opportunities for residents that have been in the neighborhood for a long time, specifically for people that own, you know, using the ability to invest their equity to build an ADU and perhaps move into it or rent, and build income that way. And then generally stabilized residents, so rental assistance, priority policy that the city's already working on, displacement vouchers, and then on the ownership side, we have ideas and recommendations around helping people, programs to help people invest and upgrade their homes, and stay in them longer terms. Let's see. Education programs are mentioned about just not letting predatory, you know, lending practices for especially elderly people. So education programs around what your rights are. So I just wanted to point that out. Make sure and look at the H1 through H3 first, and we'll put this in the plan. Stabilize first. Second, we want to control affordability and character. So this is everywhere in that yellow, and then these dashed or the dotted areas are the potentially historic areas that have been called out by a historic survey. And then we have also an area that's identified as particularly vulnerable to displacement. These have to do with a lot of data that we looked at in the background. We know that want, as I said first, we want to stabilize everywhere. We know lots of people are vulnerable to displacement, not just that area, but that area, based on the data that we have, is very particularly prone to that. So controlling affordability and character. So then we want to, and this is L8 and L9 in the plan. First of all, encourage renovations and additions over demolition everywhere, but especially in these potentially historic areas. Looking at a demolition ordinance that makes it more difficult to demolish an existing building. Limiting the size of new construction, especially for single unit and duplexes. Those are the types of housing that tend to be more expensive because they're bigger, and price per square foot can go up because of the size of the house. So we want to limit that. This is specifically important in Chaffee Park because Sunnyside just implemented the conservation overlay that kind of helps put in new tools to control size and other things. Chaffee Park doesn't have that, so we specifically have a recommendation to look at that in Chaffee Park. Expanding allowable building forms. Right now in the zoning code, basically your choices are a big house and a bigger house. And so we want to make it easier and expand the toolbox. So encouraging tandem homes. Instead of a wide duplex, you have a home in front and a home in back. It preserves the character, adds density. A multiplex where it might look like a big house, but inside you might have 5 or 6 units. Cottage courts, that's a traditional prototype in the neighborhood, but you couldn't necessarily build that today. And so bringing those types of things back. And then in those, in the affordability replacement, requiring affordability replacement in the especially vulnerable areas. So if you want to add a unit in the thick outlined black area where we have identified based on data especially vulnerable to displacement, that you would require an affordability to replace what is traditional and today affordable.
Wait, sorry, can you explain that?
Yep.
One more time, then.
So this area we have, and it's on the next page too, but it's what we call affordability, hang on, let me find it. We call it affordability priority. This is a policy that says you can add an additional unit on top of what zoning allows. So if you're an SU, which is single unit, you could add one more unit if you make sure that one of those units meets affordability requirements. And then in the preservation priority area, the dotted lines, those are, you can add an additional unit on top of your existing zoning if you preserve the architecture. So you can build an additional unit onto your house or in the backyard.
But you don't have to, sorry. Is it a requirement?
No.
It's just you can.
You can, yeah, definitely not a requirement.
Without
Otherwise,
having,
you wouldn't be able to add that extra unit.
Right. So if I have a single family house today and I'm zoned SU, most places you can put an ADU, but you can't put an additional full unit. Accessory comes with guards, right? So we're saying in that area you could add on a unit. So I could have a small traditional house in Chaffee Park, and I could either I could build a house, because in Chaffee Park especially they are larger lots, smaller homes on larger lots. So if I wanted to invest the equity, I've owned my home for a long time, I could build a unit behind my house and rent out the old house, for example, or rent out the new house. You can add one more full unit. Yes.
So in that area where, with the displacement, with the preservation priority, are you also looking at changing what the setbacks are, the size of the lot, all of those things in order for that to happen?
Yes, it would probably require, so basically the essential concept is in the zoning for SU and TU, we want to ratchet down what's currently allowed. If you're going to build one unit, basically it needs to be significantly smaller. But then you can go up in size and lot coverage and things like that, we'll have to tweak the standards to allow that to happen. But because you're adding density and having smaller units, it will likely result in more affordable.
So is that a step 2 in the recommendation that planning department look at that to
Yeah,
start changing? Because
absolutely.
obviously this doesn't
Yeah,
change it.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. Mhm.
So, preserve traditional missing middle, tear down a 6, build a 6.
Mhm.
Right now, I believe it says that if you build less than 10, you can get away with overcharging for the, are we gonna adjust planning and stuff
Yes.
to make sure people can't dime the system and
Yes.
just, okay.
Yep, you're one slide ahead of me. Okay, so then third, stabilize, control, add. So now we want to offer additional locations to add missing middle housing with some caveats. So we talked about the preservation bonus. In those specific areas, if you preserve the structure, you can add a unit. If in the affordability priority, if you preserve the affordable unit that currently exists, you can add another unit. And then there are these other opportunities. So that identified, and they're in pink on this map. So we identified carriage blocks as an opportunity. These are the traditional square blocks that used to have, and some of them still exist, which by the way, we do also have a recommendation to make carriage lots, those lots, the donuts in the middle of the block, developable. We know that there are a lot of challenges to that today. So those are opportunities to add housing, but also many of those blocks have been consolidated. Those carriage lots have been added to an existing lot, creating much larger lots, and in particular long and skinny lots. And so they're perfect locations, for example, for a tandem house, a house in front, a house in back, because the lot is so long. And then transit corridors, we also want to promote additional density along transit corridors because we want to put more people closer to transit and walkable places. And then finally, the dots all over the map, the black dots, those are, we've mapped traditional missing middle units. So these are units that exist. Those are the cottage courts, small apartment buildings, townhomes that were built prior to Denver zoning code or when zoning was different. And so in those areas, we say in the plan that we want to preserve those. A lot of them are very small units, definitely more affordable. But if you are going to redevelop, then you have to provide that same number of units. So in other words, you can't tear down a 3-unit structure and build a giant house. You would have to put back in 3 units. Any questions?
I have questions.
Yep.
I have questions from slide 1, slide 2, slide 3. When
Oh,
can
okay.
we ask questions? That would be my questions. When can we ask questions?
Okay, let me get through two more. So those are stabilize, control, add, and this is the fourth is sort of part of the add, but it's everywhere else. So outside of so you see all the light yellow areas. Everywhere else are areas in current zoning where we already allow increased housing densities and forms. So these are areas where this can already happen. We have recommendations to encourage better design outcomes. And Rebecca, so we want to talk to you about a couple strategies to update. One was what we talked about last steering committee, that the new affordable housing requirements are only for 10 units and up. So we're probably going to see a lot of 9-unit buildings. And so we want to look at a new strategy about requiring affordable units in less than 10-unit structures. And then from Trupti, a point about these larger lots. You sent one example to me. I'm sure it's not the only one, but for example, this particular lot is about 20,000 square feet. It's currently zoned PUD, so it's in the old zoning. We have recommendations to encourage all old zoning to convert to the new zoning, But in this instance, it's surrounded by TU zone districts, so it would probably go into a TU, which is 2 unit, in the new zoning code on a 20,000 square foot lot. So that doesn't make much sense. So should we look at other areas and other recommendations to perhaps encourage missing middle, like these, you know, large lots? So 2 things we're thinking about. Do we need more language around affordability requirements? If so, what? Like adding language about less than 10 unit projects requiring some affordability? And then should we look at a recommendation that is perhaps a trigger for larger lots so that we're not encouraging a 20,000 square foot lot to be 2 units when it could be 6, 8. Okay.
You want to maybe add, well, we can have the discussion, but maybe we should answer any clarifying questions first. Councilwoman Sandoval, were your questions more clarifying types of questions, or?
Nope. You could go move on. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I want to reinforce the consistency of what you're saying with the questions you're asking here with the prior slides, in that if you have this affordability sort of emphasis on single unit and 2 unit development, then it makes sense that the additional affordability requirement would then go 3 units and above, not at 10, because then you have this weird sweet spot between 2 and 10 where you could develop a lot of things that don't hit missing middle. So I think you've got the emphasis in the rest of the plan to support require a trigger at 3 or greater. And
So maybe before we go into kind of detail about
Okay.
that specific recommendation.
Can you go back
I did-
1 slide to the L10 recommendation? Or yeah, that one. Okay, perfect.
So we wanted to go through what was in the plan, because we know it's a huge plan and it's a lot to take in, all these different pieces that kind of impact the issues of affordability and the issues of character, and whether or not missing middle is truly being kind of expanded. So we kind of wanted to do an overview of what's currently in the plan, and sort of taking out, it sounded like we had a lot of consensus last meeting that we maybe needed to do more, hence the idea of having a requirement for under 10 units. But I did want to ask, because we didn't ask, does anyone feel like what is currently in the plan without adding kind of the potentially kind of sub 10 unit affordability requirement, or looking at larger lot size or other tools? Does anyone feel like what's in there is currently adequate, kind of keeping in mind?
I'm just answering that question. Yes, I do.
You do think what's in that? So without this 10, adding the piece of like 10 piece, 10, if it's 10 units or below, adding affordability. Do you want to speak more to that?
Oh, sorry. I thought you were asking about the totality of the slide.
Yeah, sorry. It was a hard thing to try to say. So I was trying to say like our current, but it seems like maybe not a lot. So maybe we go ahead and move forward to this 10 unit spot. So how many people would feel like the plan would be made better by adding some language around if it's for buildings that are projects that are under 10 units and requiring affordability? Was kind of the feeling. So it seems like pretty across the board that people feel like that's a good direction to move. Does anyone want to kind of add to, like, if we do that, any thoughts we have or we should be considering as if we move forward with that?
Yeah, I want to stress that just because you're adding an affordability component, you're not changing the entitlement, meaning that you're in many cases you're granting them additional development entitlement in exchange for affordability. So just because they can still sell the same number of square feet, they just have to portion it so that some of those units are affordable. And so you're not getting rid of the right to sort of make money on your development. And so, because I see so much CPD talk about, you know, preserving, like they hear from the special interests that this is what, you're gonna kill us. And the bottom line is, Denver is not gonna lose its desirability by becoming more desirable.
That's a good, yeah, you're saying that, yeah, that you don't think it's going to have a negative impact on people wanting to develop in these neighborhoods.
Yeah.
That there's good trade-offs there. Yeah.
How will this coordinate with the nest piece of it? Like, is this gonna carve that out to have different language within what they already do at Nest?
Well, that's why we kind of went back to the, you know, this idea of making it clear in the plan that first we want to stabilize, then we want to control, then we want to add. Like, it's a tiered system, and so I think under the stabilize is all of those nest opportunities.
But we don't have any nest.
What do you mean by nest? Sorry, I don't know if I know that term.
So it's, what's the acronym?
Neighborhood stabilization.
Neighborhood stabilization.
But we don't have any nest neighborhoods. Zero.
Well,
And
no,
we're
I
not
guess
gonna get
maybe
any
that's
nest
not- I
neighborhoods.
guess I'm talking more about the affordability stuff, that maybe it's part of the same department.
The
where-
nest language that we have in the plan is under, and that's specifically in the H1 through H3 housing. And there's lots of good stuff in there.
So is there a way to, we just updated the West area plan, and I had part of West Colfax in that plan. And since that plan adoption, consistently we have rezonings coming through in Villa Park and Westwood. And they're adding 3-story density on corner lots, and there's no affordability requirement. We had one last night, and it was super controversial because it came direct from the neighborhood plan. So could, like, literally it's coming from the neighborhood plan to rezone these from single unit to I think RH 3H or something like that, which has the apartment form in it, which they could do on a corner lot that was a single family home, like 20 units, right? In that situation, because that zone district has different forms that allow more density, could we put a trigger in here, just thinking outside the box? Instead of having it units, because the expanding housing affordability policy that we passed last year is 10 units, right? Could we put a trigger on rezonings that, depending on how many, because you're taking a naturally occurring affordable home in a low-income neighborhood, rezoning it, adding entitlement, could you have some type of trigger that has it with that rezoning that you have to have a certain amount of units that are affordable, that you're putting back in there? I don't know how it would work, but I do know that this is a concern that we are experiencing at council from the West area plan, and that last night was conveyed from my new colleagues who are watching this plan, are like, oh, this is about to happen in Northwest Denver. Once this gets voted, now we're going to see tons of rezonings in Council District 1. And so could, like, how other than having number of units, I know that's the way we traditionally have done it in the city because that's was expanding housing affordability, can we think outside the box and have the trigger be the rezoning? Because I think that they would have to rezone to go into these zone districts to get the density that they want.
Yeah,
Such as
this is
food for thought.
that was something that I wish.
We can't live back in time. So moving forward,
No,
talk
but
about
but Jefferson Park's
gonna
a
be his
perfect
whisper here over here.
No, but a perfect illustration of that, right? Which was, I often said, if you go to my corner, you could look, and where there were once 7 houses in a mix of single family and duplex, there are now 61 market rate units. And one way to get to that, short of doing a moratorium and preventing, new entitlement until rules are in place, would be that, look, if there is it's a
Can
housing.
you explain, sorry, I'm the layman, the new entitlement piece, like what that means?
New zoning that gives
Like
you
new
ability to build a bigger, build more square footage and more product that you can sell as a developer.
Yeah.
More housing. Sorry. That consistent with the preservation goals. Housing preservation doesn't necessarily mean that you keep the little house on that property, but you should keep a unit that matches that in square footage and number of bedrooms. And so that actually what you would do in the interim, until new units are, if it is a quasi moratorium that basically says no new, until there's rules in place, you have to, if you're gonna get this new zoning and build multiple units, you have to at least put back a unit or two, I would do two, that were the same size as what you destroyed in the process because if you had done that to Jefferson Park, then at least in the 61 units, you'd have 7 that were identical in size and therefore affordability.
Do people feel like, so we kind of have two different ideas presented here, so we have the idea of the trigger being rezoning, and then we have the idea of the trigger being some kind of regulation on units less than 10. Do we feel like?
I just wanted to confirm, so the common theme from both those comments is, in order to get where we want to go, it requires a lot of updates to standards, but is there an interim kind of solution or tool that could be explored, knowing that, you know, it's hard to wait around till all the regulations are updated, fixed? Is that what I'm also thinking?
That's why I thought the zoning, if like the zoning tool
Yeah,
or
well,
something
somebody's not
like.
gonna be able to implement
I don't know.
what's implied in this without doing a rezoning unless the city does the massive
Yeah,
rezoning. So each individual owner has to go, and that's a trigger, is what she's saying. And this is gonna provide ammunition like it did in the West Area Plan, once this is actually published, that then they can rezone to like whatever we're saying in here, and if for some reason we missed something or something, or some developer's gonna figure out how to get around it, like maybe she's saying, is there some way we can kind of have a trigger of like, as part of that rezoning, because it's gonna, she's right, it's just gonna be a bunch of rezoning, people are gonna figure out, okay, now, this says I should have, 7 stories, or, whatever, and then it's just gonna keep going.
And I think we could probably be more clear in the plan, but like I don't think the intention is that we would rely on like property owners to like advance this specific piece about the low residential areas through rezonings. It would definitely have to go through a larger city-led process to figure that out. But yeah, I definitely get the comment there about like is there interim.
But if that's the goal of, if there's anything in here that indicates that in this area, this property should be X, Y, Z, that property owner, if they're smart enough, maybe will figure out how to provide a rezoning and say, this plan shows that I should have a reason to do that.
The rezonings will be faster than any
Yes.
legislative action that will be taken.
What do you mean legislative
rezone
action?
for
In
1,
other words,
2,
they
and
want
3
to
up
change
there.
any policies to do the 3 to 10 or anything like that.
Necessarily
create
have
that.
They wouldn't have to rezone.
Well, I
Yeah.
don't know, but-
Yeah, the
They
first
wouldn't
3
for
bullets.
free. Yeah, I mean, if you already have a SU, right? And we're allowing them to add something,
Right.
or one and add something if you preserve, there's no reason
But if the
needed.
current zoning doesn't allow this is not zoning. This is just a plan that supports future zoning.
But the
So-
point is, you don't have to rezone.
You don't have to
add it.
rezone to get
So
the.
let me, let me get the,
My
yes,
concern
you
is
would.
that it's all fine and dandy that we put some clause in there that we say we have to maintain this many with this space. But we know that just because we maintain that many with that space does not make it affordable. The main thing is the affordability side of it. So we're gonna keep this 600 square foot, whatever it is, but we need to make sure that that 600 square foot space is appropriate to what it should be in the real world, as opposed to now, yeah, it's 600 feet, but for example, my house, 700 feet, it's worth $650,000. So keep the space, but what? Make it so that nobody can afford, nobody neighborhood-wise come from here, native, anything, can afford to live there. So more concerning to me is, besides maintaining the standard of the space, what kind of community are we gonna get that's gonna be able to afford to live in that space?
And Jamie, I think you came in towards the end, but so we did cover a little bit of that, or actually a lot of that in the first slide or couple or two. But just to, Cheney was talking about like how do we stabilize and help provide the affordability that already exists in the neighborhood today. To talk to to speak to the concerns that you're talking about.
Yeah, did anybody say how we were gonna do that?
Well, can I just make a comment just from knowing what's going on? I mean, I think it's this is like a part of the puzzle, but like, unfortunately from a grand economic standpoint, like interest rates are outrageous right now, and like 75% of people that own their homes are locked in at 3 to 5% interest rates. They're not gonna move, so we're not gonna have inventory for people to do any of this. And they're also not gonna do any of this development if rates are 7 or 8%. They're just not gonna do it. And then that doesn't link, like you just can't, like nobody's gonna move, so inventory is gonna stay so tight, and then prices are gonna stay where they are. Like it's just kind of an economic thing. Like you can't do anything about that. If you wanna add affordability, there needs to be grants. I mean, there's like, as far as that, your house being $650, like that's not gonna change unless we have some giant, like, crash in the market. Like right now, the way rates are, it's keeping inventory extremely low. Like right now, I think we have 6,000 listings in the Denver metro, and we should have almost 30,000 to be a balanced market. So even though it feels like we should, like things cost twice as much as they did last year, or a little more than a year ago, like a year and a half ago, like rates went from 3 to 7, like, so people can't afford the same thing they could last year, but like the problem is people that are locked in their houses, they're not gonna move unless they're getting a new job, getting a divorce, having a baby, so people aren't selling, and so inventory is low, so people that are moving here that have money, they're gonna pay the same prices. It's just, it's unfortunate.
But we're talking about growth right now. That's specifically what we're talking about.
Yeah, I guess this is just a plan, and I think at some point maybe we'll get into, but like I don't think anybody's gonna be developing a lot of 10-unit or 9-unit or 8-unit projects right now when you can't, like interest rates are so high, the cost of money is so high, construction is so expensive. Like just this overall market, I'm just saying, like I think from an actual affordability standpoint, that's more of like a federal grant, local grant, like to actually be able to help people get into homes that exist or will exist in the future. Like I guess I'm just saying, we can't just make it cheaper.
End of the conversation, because I thought I came in and I heard people talking about taking these corner houses that were 1, 2 houses and turning them into multiple location or multiple residences. So maybe I just didn't hear the conversation.
I think that's
what I'm
theoretical.
thinking
You did, but it's
we're
theoretical.
talking about growth and taking these houses that are already there and that are affordable, that these people are not gonna leave, which I completely understand, then what exactly are we talking about when we're talking about taking these houses and then redeveloping them into multi-residential places?
So I think one of the things we were speaking about, and it seemed like we had a lot of support, was potentially adding a requirement for having affordable housing be included in these smaller projects. So like less than 10 units was one of the things. There was also the idea presented of triggering at rezoning. So those were ideas for how do we make sure like these new builds are affordable. So we're kind of talking about how do we, because that was last month, I mean, there was a lot of concern about exactly what you said, this missing middle housing. Is it really gonna be affordable to people? Let's see, we had a lot of hands up. Okay, so I'll start with Rebecca and Tim.
One of the things we have to remember is we can't necessarily let the failings of our modern current time mess with something that we're doing we're hoping is gonna still be good in 2040. So we do have to keep the bigger picture in mind about how we are going to plan now for improvements incrementally along the line.
And hear what Lexi's saying, that there might need to be grants or something in the interim, but also thinking of the plan as a long-term tool. Yeah. Tim?
Yeah, so, as I look at what the city is trying to do with affordable housing currently, I guess my analysis of it is people are allowed to build more units, taller buildings in the 10 and up range, and then limit the cost of the housing certain, 10% of the units or whatever the number is. and the other units go up in price even higher. The really nice ones are up on the top of the 7-story building now, where Roost only have 5 stories. So, I'm not sure that's the right result, but that is the result of what's currently legislated. So, when we talk about from 3 to 10 to 9 units, we have to be really thoughtful about, well, what incentives are you giving somebody to do that? You know, do they get to build more, or is it just a blanket requirement for affordability? What it really does is it redistributes affordable units and non-affordable units, and the non-affordable ones go up in price to cover the cost of the lower one.
They can only do that so much, right? Like, I mean, the market dictates how high they can.
Exactly.
Yeah, but,
Investment stuff.
Yes.
yeah, and so you may slow down development, and some of us might say that's okay, but that's not the intent. So I would just say, I say this a lot, the devil's in the details when we get into this kind of stuff.
Just think about potential and an unintended consequence on the cost of the other units,
Yeah.
not just the affordable units. Okay, we'll do Shruti and then Raphael.
So I just want to get back to Amanda's original point, and I want to make sure I understood the beginning of this conversation correctly, which was that in the West Area Plan, they're seeing an unintended consequence right now. And I think, I think we've gotten away from that to the big picture, and basically the government needs to build this housing if it's going to be affordable. That's the reality. But, to the point of the unintended, now that we know that that's happening there, we should know that that can happen here and at least try to offset it. If that's really, that was really the point of what I think Amanda was saying, and also Raphael was saying, is what are the unintended consequences right now that we're putting in there? And is it a height thing? So, for instance, if we're talking about corridors, density changing on corridors, right? So for us, 44th, take home, B46, zoom out. What can happen there? They could go for a rezone and they get a higher entitlement because the plan says we want more density. At that point, are we losing the existing affordable, which is why Raphael was saying we should make them keep one affordable.
Yeah.
To your point, the other two are gonna get expensive and the people from California can afford it.
Yeah.
But I mean, so there is an unintended consequence we should deal with if that's what's already happening. So just maybe bringing the conversation back to dealing with the unintendeds that we're putting in here right now. And it's around the height potentially and a rezone when it happens.
Yep, okay, noted. I think we're looking at rezone triggers, we're looking at 10 unit, 3 to 10 unit, whatever, affordability. Potentially this larger lot thing, I mean, this is, I don't know exactly the language that the West Area Plan said, but it sounds like it said something about corner lots may be appropriate for higher density. We're thinking about saying these larger lots might be appropriate, so that we just maybe do some analysis. We've got tons of GIS data we can look at, what, like how many
That's
20,000
smart.
square foot lots are there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, they're going from SU to URH3A.
okay.
And it's the 3A that has the apartment form in there. So you can, and you can get that on a corner lot. Yeah, and the one that we did last night was 9,600 square feet.
That was the lot area?
Yeah, that's the lot area, and he's gonna use the apartment form and put 16 to 20 units on there.
Actually, we
So
have MS.
I think Renee had her
9,600
hand up,
feet,
so I wanted to.
and he's gonna,
I think that, one of my thoughts is that if someone can build more, and you want affordability, then you have to restrict the affordability. So not just the replacement of the unit, but an affordable level of that. And I heard differently. I heard Raphael said replace the size of the unit, but I heard Shupti say replace the affordability of the unit. Those are different. And my question would be, maintain affordability how? Through a deed restriction? Through, because that would absolutely be essential. And one of the
Can you explain how a deed restriction, what that is?
a deed restriction goes with the property so that If it's sold, then, and I'm buying the property, it's like, oh, this property, one of these units needs to be affordable at all times. And so that comes up when the property is selling. And it's a whole different issue about just monitoring it, right? Because I could say, yeah, okay, I'll take the deed restriction and then like crank up the rent on both units. And if there's no checking of that, then it can, of course, people always try to do that. But I do think it's a good way to make sure that not just the size of units, but some affordability.
How
is
do other
maintained.
feel about like that piece of like, not just this, and I think that I heard Jamie speaking, not the size, but the cost of the house.
Correct.
That's
You
what
need a
I-
balance of the two.
Yeah.
Because what you really want is,
That's what
you know, if it was a 600 square foot house with 2 little bedrooms, it'd be nice to have a 600 square foot apartment that was, also had 2 little bedrooms for the same cost per month.
Well,
In an
and
ideal
to-
world, I don't know if that's achievable.
Yeah.
Well, but
I'd
that-
like to finish that thought though. I think that one of the things that you can do is if you can match the subdivision requirements with some of those larger lots, then you're creating additional ownership opportunity.
Mhm.
And one of the curveballs that we're seeing with the ADU program is just that. We're getting families who are co-financing the construction of a 2 or 3 bedroom ADU to create an ownership opportunity in a neighborhood where it doesn't exist at a price point that it doesn't exist. And so as we think about that, I think it's important to think about multiple generations and families who, if they can, should be able to create an additional ownership opportunity that would be affordable. Because families are desperate for it.
I think A and
Is ever, how are people, like, nod if you feel like you're agreeing with Renee?
Yeah.
So I can kind of see the whole group and how we're feeling.
I just have a quick addition. One, just a question, or that Tim had said is what could other incentives be or things that, for 3 units at least, not having to go through SCC process would be something that would really help. It could be an additional incentive, I don't know. It's so similar to a duplex, it's just like, why do we have to spend 8 more months or 18 more months going through a site development process when it's pretty much the same as a duplex. In a duplex, you don't have to go through a whole site plan process, so just another potential incentive for doing.
Well, even that, all those add-ons that you're talking about, those forms, which we have now, like the in-block units that we have now, there should be certain forms that we don't have to go through.
That's smart.
It sounds like we have some good ideas for expanding missing middle / affordable ability in the neighborhood. And then Cheney also spoke to like looking into, if we were to consider this idea of looking at bigger lots, how many are there? What are we actually talking about in terms of there? Is there any other pieces before we kind of try to move on to the Sunnyside industrial kind of piece that we want to consider in terms of expanding this kind of missing middle piece? Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, and this may sound like it's building on what you were saying, Renee, but the 20,000 square foot lot example, you know, when I first heard that tonight, like, we'll just subdivide the thing. And so, I mean, it's just kind of a common sense thing. Don't let somebody build 2 houses on it. It's on 2 houses. Just subdivide those, get the right number of units, and then do duplexes. Or whatever.
So having some language about like, because whatever's happening now is triggering it to be zoned for something that doesn't make
Max,
sense.
set a maximum lot size or something.
Kind of like with the carriage lot.
Yeah, we've had multiple developers on that one wanting to do something, but they were not allowed
Right.
to. And now I think someone has turned it into a commercial space using the existing building. That could probably make a lot of people happy. However, if we're thinking about, you know, eventually
Yeah.
being able to add units, you have to do something, and they have to be able to.
Yep. So 7 o'clock, and I want to give you guys a break. And I feel like Raphael, you wanted to
Yeah,
add something.
and
real
it's-
quick. Okay.
So I think it could be both, because I'm dead set on smaller unit sizes, because that's locked into the market. like it's gonna go up and down with the market because it can't change its volume. But yeah, if a developer wants to just build uniform units and doesn't want the brain damage of coming up with a subordinate unit, then yeah, go in with a permanent deed restriction that's monitored somehow as an alternative. Like you can, I'm all for giving developers options to meet an affordability requirement. And so that's it. Go ahead, keep building what you're building. But now those units are gonna, you know, it's going to be locked into affordability, into lower AMIs somehow.
So you're thinking, is it, what you're saying is that the focus should be on the size, because that goes up and down? I just want to
Right. No, that's the whole reason. Because if you just said, hey, I need a 600 square foot unit to replace a 600 square foot half a duplex, you're going to get a 600 square foot studio. Whereas when I moved here, I lived in a 1 bedroom that was sub 600 square feet with a kitchen and a living room and a dining room. You're going to get a 600 square foot studio that's going to market to a different household. And so what I'm saying, when you do a like for like, and then it still sells per square, like the market is, your financing is based on your cost per square foot, you know. And so that's why I keep trying to lock it into a size. But if they want to do a permanent deed restriction that locks in a subordinate price, that's, I would say, give them the option. You know, you can go either way. You know, but you are changing the demographics. And this gets back to the Jefferson Park thing, which is you had small 8 to 1,000 square foot houses, multi-bedroom houses, and then single story, with now 4-story, you know, 3-4 story, 14-foot wide. It's a different clientele that's moving in there. And so you're not preserving the housing options that you're destroying in the process. And so that's where I'm going with the physical aspects. Yeah, but the thing and to your point, the market, it's interesting, right? You have a bunch of young people that have been clamoring for this housing, that have been paying $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a month in rent for years. Now that the market slowed down and maybe created some, I don't know, the cost of money is too high. So what's going to happen? The development community is going to wise up to that, and they're going to start building smaller units anyway, because that person with the rental history can qualify for a higher amount of money. They just can't qualify for a 1,200 square foot unit, but they can qualify for a 600 square foot unit. And so you get these little monocultures of what was built at what time. And sure, Denver's evolved, Northwest Denver's evolved that way, but if the city doesn't recognize when gentrification's happening and create these mechanisms whereby, if we're going to say priority 1 is preservation, and you don't have any mechanism to preserve housing in situ, you will get this pattern of, well, the market just adapted to whatever the culture, what the climate was in the housing market, the cost of materials, and the financing market. And so that goes back to my problem with this preservation slide, all the way to slide 1, which is very few of those things address the people that are there, you know.
Well, I kind of disagree, Rafael, because I'm very jazzed up about the community land trust concept and the neighbors were when we talked about it in our neighborhood. And of course the ADU that I still curse that I'm trying to build, because I have a daughter who's a teacher at Edison and can't afford to buy in Denver, and I refuse to have my grandson live in Brighton and Henderson. So we financed it. We didn't have money or how, and I'm not rich and I'm not wealthy. All we have is our house. And so we had to. I want to put emphasis in how do we help people who live there, and I'm saying I'm one of those people, do that. So we stay, and my daughter gets the primary house, and me and my husband, we're opting for the 864 square 2-bedroom.
But that's how it's supposed to work.
I'll live there, I'm not paying that much, one level. I did complain because I couldn't do 2 stories, but then I thought about it, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna walk up 2 stories?
Okay, lady, you gotta do one story.
But that's exactly, Nita,
But
that's how it's supposed to work.
So to me, we have a unique opportunity with the recent passage of that money for housing at the state level. And Denver doesn't apply for these damn grants.
We did.
I hope we did, because
Cranston
it didn't
did.
before. But anyway, just saying, well, I wanna talk about how do I wanna see that in reality. I'm into what's real, and I understand market, but hell, I bought my house at that place at 9%, y'all, cause I didn't qualify. So I don't care. I don't care. I have bonds and stocks and IRAs. I have a home.
But
That's all I have.
I wanna use your brain power on this
Oh,
very
okay.
problem, right? Which is, what you're saying is exactly how it's supposed to work. The problem is if you if you set the table like this, the speculators that are not corporate investment will go in and buy your neighbors out for more money than their land is worth, meaning their house is worth, but less than their land is worth with that entitlement. And that's,
Okay. I see it happening. You're right, Raphael. So I am concerned. Yeah, I just am concerned. I mean, community got excited when I talked about the land trust meeting. My neighbors, in my neighborhood.
So
But-
Nita, you're saying you wanna have more emphasis on the community land trust piece of the plan?
I do.
Yeah.
And I believe more people, but I'm not disagreeing that you have to have some way to not let people take advantage, although they still will, that's the point, but just suggesting.
And I think combining some of these with what we need right now is a lower interest way to finance. And if we combine that with many of these recommendations, we would get affordable units. We would get more units being built by homeowners, but a lot of the financing and a lot of the grants are just available to large developers. The other areas, they're not available to homeowners, and there's so many homeowners who need to, they're doubled up, they're ready to spend that money. We've had 138 applications for ADUs in the last 3 months, because families are desperate, but you know what? Most of them cannot get financing. So if we even had a 4% financing mechanism, all those projects would be going forward.
Is that something the city could do with that?
I have it written down. I could talk to you more about that. But one thing that's on this slide that's interesting is all of the rezonings that have happened in Westwood since the passage of the plan. They're all LLCs. And so my office started tracking, we do welcome letters. And so it's also nice to get a welcome letter from the councilperson, right? But it's also data that I never had before. And so now I can actually cut the data. And so when the governor released his land use bill, I had Melissa from my team cut the data and say how many houses are people in Northwest Denver and how many houses are LLCs. And at the end of this year, we'll have 2022 data and 2023 data. And what was it? It was like over 20% or something like that?
It was over 15%. We were sitting.
That were sitting in 2021 that were LLCs when the interest rate was low. So it'll be interesting next time I come around, we could cut the data and share it with you all to see, because that's what's happening in Westwood is all the redevelopment that's occurring are LLCs. The owners aren't even at the public hearings. It's their architects who are like, oh, well, my client has another project over here in Westwood. I don't know which one I'm talking about. Literally, he said that last night. He was like, I don't have the plans for this site. I'm sorry, I have the plans for like the 2 other sites in Westwood. And I was like, oh my God, and I can't vote no because it has plan support.
But you're right.
I think we should maybe take a break and then come back. I feel like we're having a lot of good points, but I feel like we have good stuff to move on for now, and then we can come back and kind of revisit it with the changes. And then I just want to make sure we have time to talk about the Sunnyside industrial content too.
If we could add, like, to Renee's final point about the investment,
Correct.
though, that's so important. And Johnson on the campaign trail brought up the idea
Prop
of
123.
community investment, so like communities being able to create collective investment that then can either fuel homeowners or smaller scale nonprofit developers to be able to continue to move at lower interest rates by a community supporting itself, you know? So just there's a lot of ideas around that are really critical for investment to make any of this stuff. And it, honestly, if the market slows, that could be really good for nonprofit development if there's tools in place. Yeah.
No, thank you for adding that. And no, and I appreciate all the passion and thoughtfulness, and also there's a lot of you guys have a lot of wisdom and experience, and
So
a
who
lot of
from
emphasis.
the staff is capturing the
So we got
discussion?
some note takers here in the back
Right
here.
there, okay. I just wanna make sure it's getting
Yeah. These guys back here, yeah. No, that's an important question, yeah, they're hiding in the background back there. So what time do we have now? We have 7:10, so maybe if you guys can come back at 7:15, take a little breath, eat, there's some snacks still over in the corner. Brad said he'll be sad if they're still here.
You're doing an excellent job.
Deliberate, and that's still not working.
I would say, so this is actually.
It took me a second. I was like, your voice, and then I was like, I didn't recognize you. It's good to see you. It's been a long time. How are you? Good. Pretty good.
I'm glad to see you're still involved in the community.
She gets me involved in stuff. So.
She does that. How's it going, Tim?
Good, Phil. How you doing?
What's that?
How you doing?
I'm not doing a very good job of keeping my on my hands. I'm like,
Well, that's never happened before. Why would it start happening?
last time it was like, take a little bit.
You're taking a photo? Oh, sorry.
Well, I was on my way down here.
Yeah, I think I'll do that. You know, like we've been trying to do is
I know.
conversations, just encourage a person. But if you
Like,
really
I totally
have,
wanted,
yeah.
but like, if
Yeah.
like today I had to go down Parks Tutor till 6.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't able, and so I immediately logged on and was like, okay, you said I can't.
Yeah, I can, it might be very.
Yeah, I was gonna say I definitely can respond.
Yeah, and it's not gonna be every month, it just happened to be that today was my day that I had to, and I was like,
Oh yeah. So if that happens again, just let me know, like at least a day in advance. At least I can get the Zoom or whatever set up so you can hear. So yeah, I think I can. Yeah, I just
so I was like, oh my God, they're texting me, no. And then I come in and there's an hour into it, and I'm like cranking, and you guys already talked about it, and so I'm just talking to
Yeah, no worries.
and now I just
Yeah, let me know.
Funny that I
appreciate it. It looks like a
I was like, well, I can see how you can use 3 different states.
Could be something that it wasn't like there weren't showers, it wasn't like a dentist office, really hardware there, and the kind of stuff. I'm like, Cairo type of place where you could have a table, you know?
And that's it,
Yeah, that's all you need.
I mean, that building is pretty, like, rudimentary, right?
But it looks good. It looks good. I mean, some businesses, I think, didn't want to see a 3-story floor.
Yeah.
What they didn't, a lot of people didn't want was something, and it's wonderful, a rooftop deck.
Yeah, looking over everything.
Into their home. That was one of the challenges. Because on the other side, there are it's a maximum.
Right, yeah. Speaking of affordable. Yeah, we're actually interested in that restaurant. My husband, yeah, my husband helped him get the, fall and, appreciated that. We really want Kelly and Matt. Anyway, that was, it was a normal restaurant until COVID, and then it just became like
Oh, Judy,
yeah.
okay. I haven't been there since they were still half part. Now it's just one the way it tastes menu, right?
Yeah, granted, we did all that, so like, yeah, I mean, yeah, you can definitely get in and out, but there's definitely a big service fee that is added on that gratuity, so. But, I mean, it's, well, they're about to get yeah, I mean, if they don't get one, I would be shocked. They were each touring the restaurant and they sit there, they got all the certifications, that's the best, it comes out to 12. It, I just remember Kelly was like,
You know, yes, and actually the funny thing is, my husband and I talked about this, in development area, their businesses should be in this business. And you know what, the way to succeed, just having great products. I mean, this killer made Sunnyside.
which is why I'm surprised we're not seeing like more higher, or at least better, I don't know, somebody else has usually
Anyway,
yeah, I like nasty.
so even if you're negotiating, I can negotiate.
I really like that.
16 is what we do everywhere
And that there to go, I mean, yeah, okay.
And it was funny because it was Robin, myself, and I was like pushing for more and more, and then they went to 19, and I was like, oh, that's too far. And they would not go back down from 19. I was like, oh, okay. We might just grab some of these. Maybe that was the older one. Let's ask Amanda, because they could have changed.
It'd be nice if you got like a little. Well, so, you know Colton and Allison? So, yeah, and I know they're going through the process, and it sounds like it's going on smart. But they, you know, they essentially said, denied. Yeah, so they're still planning to do this, but I worry that they're gonna get distracted, do that, and not do this, and I'm like, they still said, we had their last night, we got bread, and they said they're like, obviously pumped about that, because that's something they do soon, because it's like, yeah, so they're still planning. So I'm hoping, I mean, I know they have the
So we're gonna get going,
yeah, they'll get the notch.
is everyone ready to go for the second topic? Alright. Alright, so for the second half of the meeting, we wanted to talk about the Northeast Sunnyside conversation. So I think this is the third time we might be bringing this back to you guys, but we did have a recent meeting with the property and business owners in the area a few weeks ago, and got some input there. So we wanted to walk through, first kind of reminding you about the overall vision and recommendations that are in the plan that we went over with you maybe 2 or 3 months ago, and then review some of the specific feedback we got from the property and business owners. And based on that feedback, we have some additional suggestions for refinements to the current draft plan. So we wanted to have that discussion with the group here today. So just as a reminder of where we're talking about right here in Northeast Sunnyside. So as a reminder, as of today, Blueprint Denver identifies this area where it's largely kind of industrial, manufacturing, zoning, and places that exist in the neighborhood, so just right across the street, as a community center. So we talked about how Denver Blueprint Denver talks about community center as definitely as a direction towards just general mixed use for housing, retail, commercial services. So, as you know, even a year and a half ago, we went through the process with the community to ask the question, like, did we get this right? Did we get the community center designation right? If not, what else should it be? And what priorities should we consider for the area? So that's kind of what the center of the conversation for this area. And this area is also identified as a focus area in Sunnyside with a little bit more detail and guidance there. But really the summary of the vision that's in the plan right now and that we work with the community and you guys on is, first to support the long-standing and existing businesses that serve as cultural and historic destinations in the area. So if we think about like Mile High Comics and all the other businesses that have been in the area, to continue supporting them with the programs that are needed. Supporting the construction of affordable housing, we heard that's a key priority in the Northeast Sunnyside, especially when we look at opportunities for Quig Newton and the type of housing that could go in there, but also in some of the kind of mixed use opportunities that might exist kind of in this area as well. The third is ensuring human scale design. So especially with Quig Newton, it's a big piece of property. So as those places redevelop, making sure those are smaller block sizes, and where we do have places envisioned for a community center, a mixed-use area, having those activated with street-level active uses. The fourth, really just quality of life improvements, making sure as redevelopment occurs, there's opportunities for new park space, improvements to the Aslan Rec Center, making sure streets like Pecos, Lopan, are improved with traffic calming. 46 is identified as a way to really improve the streetscapes, the trees in the area, pet and bike infrastructure. And then the last one is really kind of, I guess, the main topic of discussion today, but this idea of, there are a lot of jobs in the area that exist today, so making sure we retain and grow new job opportunities that can benefit residents. So those were the key vision elements that we really work with you guys in the community on as a general reminder. So when we went back to the focus group to talk about some of the detailed recommendations, there were things that they supported and things that they had concern with. So I just wanted to go over things they supported and really focus our conversation mainly on the concerns, and then again, refinements to the draft plan. So support, I think when we went over the mobility and quality of life recommendations, there was pretty strong support for all those. In terms of the land use, the future land use approach of how we modified the community center designation, I think there was an agreement there. Really what we talked about last time we met was having the community center mixed use opportunities along the edges of the industrial area so that they're actually closer to the neighborhood, so that they're more serving, so they can service residents. We changed some of the properties within Quig from low to low medium to give it more capacity to grow, particularly with affordable housing. And then really a key concept that came out of it was that to that last vision point about jobs, we decided to keep an existing portion with larger warehouse buildings and closer to the interstate as value manufacturing, so continue to support the industrial atmosphere and jobs that exist in that area. And then for the remaining areas that was a community center, we talked about an innovation flex, which means that we're encouraging preservation, but also allowing a mix of uses to happen there over time. So like such as housing, retail, and commercial, things that wouldn't be necessarily compatible within a value manufacturing district, but making sure that jobs is still a key component of that. And then the fourth bullet, we kind of talked early about these ideas with you guys that we ran by the focus group and that they also supported, was being mindful about the timing of change. And this was a big concern, again, from Don Foods. They employ over a couple hundred people in 600, maybe you read my wrong. But yeah, 600 people in the area. So they were really concerned that if someone came in for a rezoning across the street from them, and they changed everything completely to 100% residential, it really makes their business hard to operate and function. And we want to make sure that the transition, is provided in a way that doesn't disrupt their businesses. So one idea we had was about, to be mindful about, yes.
Why was the focus group talking about this with two very big key pieces of infrastructure totally not recognized? One is stormwater has this grandiose water storage green space going diagonally through this area. And two is talk about this flyover bridge.
Those were all considered and discussed. I didn't go into details of.
Okay.
I didn't go into details of everything because it was 6 hours of conversation.
But
So
I think it should be overlaid on this thing because it looks like you're using the existing street grid.
Yeah, it's in the focus area map that has it a little bit more. This is just a snapshot of the future land use map. So there's a little bit more detail in the plan. So.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. So be mindful about the timing of change. So the way we addressed that early concern was that we basically said we would allow or support this transition to happen to allow residential uses with a focus on job replacement when a catalyst project occurs. So when the bridge for the 47th Avenue is constructed, or if Quake Newton redevelops and these outside forces happen, that makes it difficult for the industrial businesses to really operate. That's when we would let the change happen in the area. So that's kind of what we discussed with the steering committee, and they also supported.
So isn't that bridge gonna be the first project? I don't think Quake Newton's gonna redevelop before the bridge does. So we know that that's gonna be that first project. That's not gonna impact Dawn Foods as much as housing, right? If I recall, I wasn't at the last meeting, but Dawn Foods' biggest concern is if they're surrounded by homes and kids and people, they're gonna not want trucks and, danger.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like the bridge, so you tell me, is the bridge gonna be the thing that makes it problem for Dawn Foods to operate, or is it gonna be the Quake Newton redevelopment?
I think I heard both from them, right? They clearly stated that. Yeah, they clearly stated that the bridge would be a problem for them at a meeting.
I have a question, similar. I was at the industrial focused group, the first one but not the last one, and one of the things that I heard is if you allow residential, the market's gonna just drive residential and the jobs will all go away. And so there was several voices that said, like, let's stick with the jobs and not allow residential in, because there's enough residential in the area. Did that shift? It sounds like it changed.
No, so that policy's in there about how we want to promote both residential, but definitely promote jobs in the area. So looking at a new set of standards and programs to support that. So that's detailed out a little bit more in the focus area policy. That's specifically written for that, but yeah, we do address that.
But it's triggered by, just to be clear, any residential development cannot occur until one of those triggers happens. If Dawn Foods decides to leave, then we're looking at a completely different situation here. If the bridge happens, Dawn Foods has said they're probably not.
Nobody knows the bridge is gonna happen.
Let's also just be clear here, okay? First of all, Dawn Foods already doesn't fit. Okay? I mean, all you have to do is spend the morning walking or driving around their site and look at the amount of trailer traffic they have and how disruptive it is. So the changes in the neighborhood have already gotten us there. They're just biding their time for when they want to leave. I've sat in the room of the general manager of Dawn Foods, and they have every intention of leaving. It's just a matter of when. So let's just make that clear. They're playing the field right now, and we're one of the dates they're talking to. Part of the reaction you got at that focus meeting, part of it was a lot of landowners protecting their dollars and cents. Definitely, that was number one. Number two, it was frustration that Dawn Foods was inserted as this entity that was essentially all powerful in the planning for the area.
Yeah, and we understand, we're gonna go through modifications, I
Okay.
think let Sun finish, but they're not the only employer in this area. This area in purple employs it has 1,000 jobs. And these jobs are important to the neighborhood. A lot of these people live in, Sunnyside and Chaffee Park. And so that's the overarching theme is we want to build these businesses up and promote this area as a innovation district is what we've been.
But if Don Foods is already talking about leaving because of the change that's gonna happen, how are we gonna promote that? You're saying that a lot of, and you're probably, I'm sure a lot of people at Don Foods, 600 them employees, a majority of them probably come from these smaller, poorer communities. So how are we gonna keep those people employed?
I think they're paid pretty well.
They're
I think
very
they're
well.
like $25 an hour, somewhere in there.
That's not paid well.
Well,
If
it is
they're
overtime.
willing to work a little bit overtime, they'll make almost $100,000.
So if they're willing to not have a life and be with their families.
Can we move on through the rest of your presentation?
Yeah, so let's kind of move on, and I'll kind of pause here for discussion. I'm almost done with the slide. So really the specific concerns or the major concerns that we've heard was that currently we have the recommendations at 3 stories within the Innovation Flex areas. And mainly because we've heard kind of time before or concerns before that if you have a community center designation and if you push for higher entitlement, that will kind of push us out or signal that we won't be there. So we kept it at 3, but what kind of the pushback that we got from the property and business owners was that we're already facing kind of increase in our property taxes and feeling the pressure already. If you limit us to 3, you're limiting us from help achieve the key vision elements, but also kind of limiting the leverage that we have to do anything with the properties that we have today. So really one was about height. The other concern was that we do have the net zero jobs policy about maintaining 1,000 jobs in the area. They thought that may set unrealistic expectations that might for the city and property owners, and I know that specific idea came from the steering committee, about what this net zero policy might look like to really prioritize jobs. So we wanted to kind of highlight those 2 concerns and talk about some adjustments there. But before I do that, Brad, do you guys have anything else to add to that?
Let me add one more thing. When we talk about gentrification in communities, oftentimes we'll spend about 90% of our time and oxygen on housing. But there's also job base and the type of jobs that we have in a community. And I think what we've learned through this process is the value of manufacturing, distribution, working class jobs, whether they're getting paid $40,000 or $100,000. These are working class jobs, and many of these people, we believe, work in are in the community, and they can walk to work, or they have a short drive, or whatever it is. So we're somewhat limited on what we can do to control that moving forward. But when we talked about a one-to-one replacement idea, it was aspirational that we were going to try to at least find ways to keep the nature of these jobs intact. It may not be specific businesses, but that these types of jobs were important to the community. And I guess the last thing I'll say, and this may be incendiary because we're already agitated about it, but But I remember asking you guys on the screen, you know, like 9 months ago, you want this area to be Rhino. And honestly, you know, Rhino probably has met their one-to-one job replacement. But what has happened is they've replaced working class, 5-figure salary jobs with tech and office 6-figure jobs. And those folks are, you know, putting pressure on the housing. So you have an opportunity here to at least make a statement at a minimum, a value statement that these jobs are important. And maybe more than that, and you may not please all these property owners, but the statement that these types of jobs are important is kind of what we're getting at here. So I'll just sort of throw that.
Thanks, Brad.
So I'm confused if there's a change, because if it's IMX 3, that's 3 stories, but they're a 75-foot height, 75-foot height. So, you know, how are they struggling to meet the goals if nothing's really changing in the recommendation versus what they have to tile?
They have IA zoning right now, so they don't have IMX.
So what's the height? So if you went to, so you would basically then allow them to go IMX 3 or something like that with this.
Right, that would be the current guidance that's in the plan right now.
And that's not enough. But they don't think that that will transform the area if you gave them additional stories.
They want to transform the area. They want height entitlement. They have property taxes, and their property taxes they want to pay by using rezoning to 5-story and packing up and getting out. That's what I heard.
Yeah, it's just that
Like that's
they want to flip.
I know it's a super easy summation of the meeting that was super contentious. It was,
So what I
just so you all know, what Sam's not saying is it was the most contentious meeting I have been to during this neighborhood plan. People were yelling at each other. It was super contentious. It was crazy. It was a little crazy.
The last one.
Yes.
So what I would suggest in that
Go on.
scenario is like, and no one probably wants to introduce this mechanism, but if you did an IMX 3 an IMX 6 with a 2-to-1 FAR or something like that, and you basically said that, look, you can go 6 stories in your 3-story zone district that's got a 75-foot height limit. You can do a 6-story building on half of it, essentially.
They can do that today. That's how IA works. Is through that they are. And it's
So
a
then
2-to-1.
what's
So
their
they
problem?
can
It's restrictions on use
They
for
just want
IA.
double the entitlement.
So well, let's kind of go to the potential adjustments, and I think maybe elaborate a little bit more on the transition policy, because I think we have language in here, and then I'll just kind of maybe speak to it a little bit after kind of going through the slides real quick. So one potential change is, again, the baseline that's recommended to 3. Suggested change is change the base height to 5, but kind of speaking to that transition policy, be clear that rezonings to allow residential uses an increase in height can only happen after the catalyst project has occurred. And then the second bullet kind of speaks to what you're saying about the outcomes we want to promote in this area. As written in the draft document right now, we do entertain kind of applicant-driven rezoning. So if a catalyst project happens and a property owner wants to go in and rezone, they have the opportunity to rezone, but also make sure that they are proposing something that really focuses on the job replacement aspect that we're speaking to in our plan. But an adjustment that we're proposing is that the city initiates a legislative rezoning process, so that the city is responsible for determining when a catalyst project has occurred. So not relying on applicants to make that determination, but for the city to be proactive in that. And then also, once the catalyst project has been, we've determined that it's occurred, we work again with the business and property owners to develop the appropriate regulations that helps promote jobs in the area while allowing housing. Because I think an issue we're seeing with a base IMX industrial mixed-use zone district is that it allows for residential, so oftentimes the market will just take over and just it'll just be a 100% residential product. So what we're saying is that we need to take a closer look, Renee, to your point, about, you know, what standards need to be changed, what programs need to be paired with to actually get the jobs and the spaces so that we're able to actually have the job opportunities for residents in the area. Yes.
So, I think the thinking that you put here is working around this. So I'm gonna be the devil's advocate because I compete all the time with market rate housing developers. And they have full-time people who are looking at all the codes, looking at all the lands, waiting for their opportunity to take advantage.
Yeah.
And they have a huge market, huge demand, deep pockets. Most of the time they don't care what interest rates are. That's how they're moving forward. Can they take advantage of this? And is the answer somewhere going out on a limb? I absolutely support what Brad said. And are we sort of falling in the middle where we could be taken advantage of and just say we want to preserve jobs and double jobs? So do you just like go all the way, and do you lose too many supporters of this plan, and can people take advantage of this? Because I admit I'm just constantly losing parcels and losing out to market rate residential. It's hard to beat them, and it's hard to outsmart them.
You taking advantage of?
I mean, I think you're starting, but I think it's a big job.
All right. So you're saying to kind of reflect on that question, or you're
To reflect on
okay.
it. I wish I knew the answer.
I see 3 hands here, so I'll start. I think I saw that one first.
I'm tentative about the base height being 5 stories because we need to have the base height be 3 stories so that we have incentives.
Yes.
And I think that's a lesson learned from 30th and Blake, for instance, of like that base height should stay lower so that we have incentives that we can get more affordability, we can get other things that we want. And am I understanding this right, that it's kind of shifting from, the recommendation here is shifting from the responsibility being on the property owner to sort of create jobs or maintain jobs or that and then shifting it to the city to kind of say we're monitoring this?
I think it's basically saying that we're working with the property and business owners to develop the appropriate regulations to advance the net zero job policy instead of relying on applicants to come through the door and say, hey, I have an idea, what about this and what about that, and having these individual applicants come in, but really just look at it more holistically to understand kind of as an area what we need to do.
I think I would feel more comfortable with that if it was more outlined what the city was going to be maintaining, or like what are their goals more explicitly that we're going to be then legislatively rezoned or.
Yeah, and so maybe it is spelled out a little bit more kind of in the policy, but it basically says that the city would need to develop the appropriate zoning and economic development program tools to advance the policy, so that like the zoning tools are in place to ensure that the space is there and we're leveraging the right programs to make sure the jobs are there. And it's got more words than that, but that's the general approach. And then I feel like you had another question that I was going to address, but I'm sorry for getting that one for now.
So the Catalyst project, I'm just gonna go back to the bridge because I think that's gonna happen first. So we got a Catalyst project. Then we've got someone, and I'm gonna say it's probably Zia North, who, is looking to go 12 stories. So that's a project that could come up, right? So, something like 8 stories with, entitlements going up higher. That becomes a unique rezone property owner. Are you, in this change, are you saying at that point, the city would legislatively rezone just that property, or would look at the entire area to say, you know what, it's time for us to legislatively rezone all of these areas and we'll figure out the rest. And my concern is that 12-story is not gonna replace 100 jobs with their little coffee shops in the middle.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and I think,
So I'm trying to understand the city
yeah.
initiating a legislative rezoning
Yeah.
process, and if that's for the entire area or one property at a time.
it's really for the innovation
Oh,
flex
it's only for that area.
for area where
Okay.
where we're talking where the
Okay,
where the
got it.
focus is on jobs.
I agree with Nola on the 3 stories
Yeah,
and 5.
and Noah,
But it's
and I think you know, like the 3 stories incentives. I get your point, but I also think like it could just be, you know, a high recommendation and just strong regulations without, you know, expecting them to do something in exchange for return. It could be potentially a requirement for providing an X amount of space for kind of employment or commercial uses too. So I don't think it always has to be the EHA way of like, here's, you know, 2 stories if you do X, Y, and Z, but it could be a stricter standard as well. So,
But I have a question with that. So in areas that have historically had high industry, right? So Brighton Boulevard, Rhino Boulevard, the difference is these areas, and when Black and Brighton Boulevard, when I started with the city in 2010, you didn't have to have a college degree to get these jobs. In here, this area, 9 times out of 10, you don't have to have a college degree or a master's to get your job. If we go up to 5-story zoning, my concern is if we don't put in strong regulation, what happens is all of these people, because what they kept talking about were property taxes, right?
Yeah.
But none of them own residential. They're all businesses, and because the way Tabor is set up in Colorado, our businesses pay a higher percentage of property taxes than residential, and that's why you have ground up commercial along Tennyson. That's why a lot of our historic commercial along T-Home is being ground up. That's why along 44 you have businesses going from businesses to residential, because the performa works better when it's market, because the taxes are cheaper. So if we give them 5-story zoning, are we going to say you have to have 5-story office jobs? Like what jobs in Denver? What area do we have 5-story zoning where we have industry and like entry-level jobs? I'm just asking a question. Does anyone know? Because I don't know anywhere. Platt Street, as I've been down there just for the last 4 years, has redeveloped businesses. They're all high tech, they're all oil industry. It's like tons of oil. Everybody there has a degree. So if I think what you all have to decide is the steering committee group, what's your value? Do you value people being able to drive trucks and get us the food we need and be able to have low barrier entry level jobs? Because Don Foods told me that they're the only ones I know in this area that will hire a convicted felon. My cousin is a convicted felon. The only place he's ever worked is at Bacasita because he can't get a job.
There's at least
One other. Bill has. Bill, thank you, Bill. So if we do this, that's a value you all have to decide, is how much do you want to see this change? Because I don't know if we go to 5-story zoning, I think most everyone here probably has a college degree, I would say, if we did an assessment. These aren't entry-level jobs, and we will lose entry-level jobs that historically have been in this neighborhood going back generations. So that, I'm not trying to say I know the answer, I'm just saying you all as steering committee members have to make that value. You have to, because it was heated. This conversation was heated. They want 5-story zoning, and I've seen what 5-story zoning does in Northwest Denver. They rezone, speculative rezoning. I happen every Monday night. I'm sitting at city council. I said, what are you gonna do with your project? We're gonna sell. So then they put it up on the market. They change the zoning. They have the height, and then they sell it for way more money.
things I think we need to be careful about. One is, we keep talking about these 1,000 jobs. I don't think that's an accurate thing. We also keep talking about what we think the incomes and pay is in those 1,000 jobs. I don't think we know what that is. So we're making some very big decisions with some very fuzzy numbers. So I would really caution in that regard. I had another caution.
The job numbers are solid. We've got that.
Why not? Why not?
600 jobs are just a darn food.
No, he said
You're
like
saying
1,000.
more, you're saying.
Yeah.
Well, didn't somebody
Oh, the
go
other
in the
thing-
presentation that said, oh, that overall was 1,000, didn't you say that?
So you think there's more or less?
So she's saying that
So
there's
he's
1,000.
saying- he's
I
saying that
agree
there's
with
more.
that. I agree with it. So the data we collect.
collected it probably 3 years ago.
Well, we collected 3 years ago, but remember, it's data that the businesses provide in terms of their taxable payroll. There's a lot of other economies going on here, so it's 1,000 plus.
And the other, I'm sorry, Ralph, I remembered my second cautionary note, and that is, I heard a little bit of conflicting here, and I think we need to be 100% understanding what our objective is. We may not all agree on the objective, but we should know what our objective is. And what I have heard is two things. One person, when I said $25 an hour, scoffed that that was way too low. Another person said, we don't want $100,000 jobs. So what kind of job really are we aiming at? Because I thought we were talking about higher jobs. Not that I think we should have higher jobs, but I thought that's what we were talking about. And to what degree can we really control what kind of jobs come in?
Yeah, I think you said that they make good money, they make $25 an hour. And I said, that's not good money. That's how it went. And
Well,
But
my point is just that we should really, if we're gonna try to affect what kind of jobs are here, we should really make sure that we're all understanding what it is we think we're attracting.
And I think Emily was making the point too about her work and like this trend of schools and training and having kind of well-paying jobs but lower kind of barriers to entry from an education standpoint. So I think that's the trend that she kind of highlighted and that we were kind of imagining was that it is lower barriers of entry in terms of might not need a formal college degree, but they also don't pay minimum wage either. So we could definitely try to be more clean and fine and look at the language and making sure at least that vision and goals are tailored there. Rafael and Renee?
I'm gonna say this and I wanna watch the look on your face, Bill. Just because I don't know how this would fly. Of course, it's another left field thing, but I don't know if the planning if anywhere in the planning discussion, anyone's ever talked about essentially granting. And basically saying, you know what, this is industrial. You can move to an IMX zone district that allows for innovation without increasing entitlement. And you basically say, what, we're gonna expand the total number of uses, we're gonna 86 the residential component out of IMX, and let this just, play itself out. And the reason why I'm saying that is because Sunnyside just rezoned green overlay to sort of do a little bit of preservation in the neighborhood itself. And you have two big infrastructure projects that really should inform that area once they come to fruition. And so why create opportunity here and incent that when it's actually doing its job as it is, and all you want to do is add innovation. And yeah, none of these guys who are speculating are going to like it, because I don't think you're speculating.
I understand Amanda's comment that the vitriol that came out the other day was largely driven by a lot of wealthy property owners that wanted to protect or improve their wealth that was embedded here. I'm not in agreement with that. That wasn't my concern.
No.
My concern had to do with the fact that the Gone Foods all of a sudden had this, whatever you want to call it, it just floored me. But no, I have no problem with not giving them anything more.
Because-
And I have no problem keeping it industrial, but
Because the reality is that if, because, you know, yeah, they're impacted by the, I don't know where Tabor is, I mean, ever since we got rid of Gallagher, I mean, I don't know what the dynamics are. Residential business.
We're getting the 5-minute warning from the rec center.
But that's what puts pressure on the businesses, right, is when when all the property value increases, it increases more for those businesses. And so that's what gets to the rhino situation. And but even if it's IMX, even if the zoning stayed the same, those pressures would still impact the viability of those businesses and what comes to replace it. But if you start granting entitlement like this, you're gonna steer it to the same places that let the neighbors talk about. And so might as well just say, we're gonna preserve this area, and we're gonna keep it as so, because Denver's gonna need a place to grow in the future, and that might be it.
Yeah. So it seems like there's a lot of people who have concern about expanding the height, right? That seems to be a lot of headlines on that.
Concerned with that change.
What was that?
We go 5 minutes over 7.
Well, I think the rec center people knocked on the
Keep
door.
them, they close at 8, that's why. So, yeah.
But it definitely sounds like this conversation's not
It's not over.
Yeah, this conversation, yeah. So,
Budget so we can go longer.
yeah, I mean, so we'll kind of revisit kind of all these comments and kind of figure out our refinements. But we'll definitely be running that by the group next month. The only quick announcements.
Can I have one question?
Yeah.
One question before you finish. Do you have a time frame to get back to the industrial folks before you meet back with the steering committee?
No, because the timeline is we anticipate turning around an updated draft towards fall. So we'll have our September meeting.
Because I think that this warrants a lot of discussion, so you all have food for thought over the next 4 weeks, right? You have to figure out what your value systems are. Take a drive down Platte, I work down there, take a drive through Rhino, take a drive down Brighton Boulevard. When Nola and I were working in Brighton Boulevard, when we started as baby council aides many moons ago, it looked very different. That was there. It was very different with all jobs, like tons of jobs. And now it's no jobs.
Okay.
And I will just add to that, there's expectation, there's planned guidance that DHA would double, triple the density. That is public housing, that is workforce housing, and we need jobs. Otherwise, you're creating traffic out of the neighborhood.
all these discussions.
But we do need to
Everybody
get out of
talks
here. We have to
about
put all these
green
tables
space
away.
being a priority.
So I feel for the rec center staff who wants to go.
Hey, Tom, I think you had an announcement.
There's food for thought.
Yeah, well, I did have a few more announcements, but they're in a slide, and I'll send it to you guys. But it's just we will be going to planning board, which is a review and a approval.